Welcome to the Growth Project. This is Milt Lowder, joined today with Dr. Cory Shaffer. This is a podcast brought to you by AMPLOS. At AMPLOS, our goal is to help you be better and pursue better. What that means, we exist to optimize who you are for the important things in your life, for the important people in your life, but also optimize what you do and the dreams and goals you're pursuing. So we use our experience and expertise in the areas of performance psychology, behavioral science, and organizational consulting and development to really enhance people and enhance organizations. So the Growth Project is a podcast we created to bring you relevant research and information around the mindset and skill set necessary for success in today's world. So Cory, today kind of our topic is on curiosity, why curiosity matters. Your answer to that question, just big picture, curiosity. Why does curiosity matter?
I mean, at the core of what we do, and our listeners who have been around and heard from us quite a bit over the years know that we tend to look at through everything with a growth mindset lens. And so in a lot of ways, I think this is a trait of individuals who really embody or try to live by growth mindset principles. Inherently, if you are really trying to maximize your potential, your ability, whatever, and you believe in never stop learning, can always grow, can always improve, well, one of the qualities you probably have is curiosity. A curiosity around, okay, I understand what I do and why I do it, and it's pretty good, but I wonder if it could be just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Even the best of the best, there's an interest in, but what if it could be 0.5% better in any and all areas, I think, related to well-being, performance, and so on. And so for me, those are just my initial thoughts and just why it matters, and something that I've observed in some of the people we've had the opportunity over the years to do some work with. Like, that's one of the things I look at and see in a lot of really high performers, people who do pretty great things in whatever industry we're talking about, is there's just a curiosity of them. I mean, that's to a degree, that's probably explains why we end up with these people.
Yeah.
It's not like they're an expert in performance psychology or organizational leadership, behavior, whatever, but they're interested in it enough to have a conversation and then pursue it and keep asking questions. So what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think I go back to, Ted Lasso quoted the great Walt Whitman, be curious, not judgmental. And I think to me, curiosity is a constant opening of the mind about ideas and opportunities that haven't been explored. And I think it allows you to examine different alternatives, different ways of being, of doing, of thinking, that allows you to be better and pursue better. And I think we can get so stuck in our ways that hey, this is the way we've always done it. And you start thinking that's the only way. And I think being curious, I think one of the greatest parts of our jobs, one of the greatest privileges of our job is people inviting us in and sharing their story, sharing their passion, sharing their expertise. And that innate curiosity, whether it's innate or developed, around how can they get better, how do they find balance, how do they pursue worthy goals, and what's holding them back. And I love you tied it to a growth mindset, that just power of 1%. Imagine if I just take this angle, what might happen if? And most of us think what if in a negative way. I love Max Homa. We were just talking about him prior to walking in here. They asked him how we handled the mindset of the masters. He said, when I find myself thinking about what could go wrong, I switch to dreaming about what could go right. I think curiosity is, well, what happens if? What if I get this right? What if I get a little bit better? What can I learn from somebody else? And so in that way, it not only opens your mind, I think it takes the stress and pressure off of you as an individual, because you're focused on learning from someone else, or from some other experience, or from some other method or methodology to get better.
Yeah, and I mean, you even alluded to, is this innate or is it learned? And, for a lot of things, I tend to believe that you might have some initial innate starting point, and maybe that's it's higher in some than in others, but whatever the starting point is, even some of the people in my life or that I've had the pleasure of working with, who I would describe as some of the most curious people I have ever met, they didn't initially start there.
Yes.
It wasn't until they were educated on it and learned about it, that really like the mind kind of opened up. And now you look at them and it's cool to almost see and to point out to them, especially like, man, you didn't think this way a few years ago.
Yeah. Something lit the flame.
Right.
And what was that? So we've talked about, hey, people that I think about. So who's somebody that comes to mind to you that says, this person is curious?
Yeah, the best example of this for me, and really who I was thinking of as I was just describing that, friend of the podcast here, been on a few times, but Spencer Strider, pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. When I met Spencer, and he documented this himself, I don't have to rehash it necessarily. You can go check out the podcast episode if you're interested, but there was a stubbornness about him. I would argue even to say like there was a fixed mindset about just how he viewed himself as a baseball player, how he thought about baseball and so on. But once he learned about the value of, let's say, a growth mindset and what that really means and the opportunity that existed within that space, once he stopped getting over such a fixed viewpoint on everything, I mean, he's probably the most curious person I've ever met at this point.
Yeah.
And some of that, again, like there's real, like a deep passion for what he does within baseball. Like he genuinely is just kind of a baseball junkie. But now you pair that with, some real curiosity and a desire to get better, and you get the absolute best of him.
Yeah.
Where, if you go back to last season, led Major League Baseball in wins and in strikeouts on the best team in baseball. And then this year, in the offseason, still sought to improve and get better and added a curveball to his arsenal. And all of that just comes out of curiosity around like, okay, I'm really good objectively, but I wonder if I could be even better if I added a new pitch.
Yeah.
And not then to just add it, but to go about it in such a way to deliberately, sort of research and have conversations with people and talk about like what would be the most effective pitch to add and why. And like, let's have some conversations. Let's get on the TrackMan and start throwing it and see how it all works. So it's like that curiosity then tied with like a very deliberate process of how to learn is really, really cool.
Yeah, so it's beyond, we're talking about curiosity beyond just asking a question.
Right.
Like it's exploring it deeply and meaningfully with evidence and information and facts. You mentioned growth mindset. I couldn't help but think about, we believe the fundamental quality of a growth mindset is I'm going to be the best that I can be. And so you can hear that as you talk about Spencer. It isn't about anybody else. It isn't about what I did last year. It's going to be the best that I can be. And limit the regret that he may have in his career that he didn't do everything he could to be the best that he could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anybody that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, there's two that, it's, both friends of the podcast. One is, as you were sitting there talking about Spencer, I was thinking about Ben Martin, who has been on the PGA Tour. I've worked with since 2011. Go back to when he was in college at Clemson and I was at Clemson. He didn't seek me out. His initial thought was, well, maybe you had to have something going on in your life that unrelated to golf to go get some help. But what I've learned to appreciate so much about him, he is deeply curious in all aspects of life. He pursues knowledge. And so it's fun for he and I to discuss ideas. He'll go read a topic. He'll go read a book. He'll go read an article, and he'll bring it to me. He's like, hey, what do you think about this? I was thinking this related to a growth mindset. How does this meditation relate to quieting your body? And is that, when I hear your brain talk about the power of being, is that what you mean about being in the present moment? And so he's looking for all sorts of information. He's got a foundation like Spencer does. Here's what I believe. Here's what makes me successful. But integrating that knowledge and expanding that knowledge base, he just loves to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think so do I. Those are fun people to work with. The other one is also Mike Noonan, who's also been on the podcast. Somebody asked me the other day, like, why do you think Noonan wins so much? Has he got the best players? I know his staff's been there for a long time, and all those factors matter. But how I described Noonan was this deep sense of curiosity and curious to see what other people think and what they know. Bill Beswick, I think, is probably one of the foremost, if not the foremost, sports psychologists in the world. So he's been a part of Noonan's life for 30 years. Well, when Noonan came to Clemson, he invited me in because it was a different perspective, a different lens. Inviting you in from the very beginning.
I had to earn his
Well,
trust first. I had to earn his trust, but once I entered the circle of trust, yeah, he wants to know what I think from time to time.
I forgot about the initial conversation when he asked you a question, and he tested you. You're right, but you have enough interaction with Noonan. Wouldn't you say about his curiosity?
Yeah, no doubt. I think, again, one simple indicator of this, certainly not exhaustive by any means, but let's just say one of the traits, curious people are typically well-read.
Yes.
And we were talking about it. He's probably the most well-read, certainly sport coach I've ever met, but one of the most well-read people, period, I've ever met.
Yeah.
Which, again, just shows you like a thirst for just trying to find different perspectives, opening himself up to different ideas. And then I think wisdom is taking that curiosity, but being selective with what you do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think that curiosity without a sense of understanding prior, without a sense of knowledge, without a foundation, can lead you down a lot of different paths. But gaining that knowledge, information, how do you apply it, turning that knowledge into application is what wisdom is really all about. Mm-hmm. And I think as I'm thinking about these people, and there's countless others, what that does is invites other people into the process.
Yep.
It makes you feel like you're a part of the process because they value what you have to offer. They value your experiences. They aren't valuing your position or what you've done. They value you and what you think about a situation.
Sure. And again, even still, you could disagree with them, or you could tell them something that they don't want to hear, and it's at least going to be considered. Now, whether or not they take on your perspective isn't the point. They're curious enough to ask the question, to explore it, to debate it. That's what we're talking about, the foundation of even just being curious enough to invite you into the conversation, to ask the question. So I think the purpose of what we want to get into today for the remainder of our time are just some of the qualities of curious people, some of the tangible, impact or the effects that come, especially if you can get some curious people, let's say, on your team. So where do you want to start, Milt?
Yeah, so before we dive in, for you, the listener, think back as you hear these characteristics. Would these be traits that you would describe yourself?
Sure.
And if not, we do believe as humans there's opportunity for growth. This is not an innate trait that you're born with. Even if people are naturally curious, as you said, there's still elements of growth. And so if these are not how you would define yourself or how others would define you, think about how you can put these into practice to expand your curiosity, expand your knowledge base, and expand your sphere of influence.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
and I think some of these qualities too, Milt, before we jump in, there's probably quite a bit of overlap with some of these. So maybe we'll seek as we go here to just kind of combine them, so we don't overwhelm the listeners too much. But where do you want to start?
Well, that's always a tricky question because my tendency is to overwhelm people with just overwhelm them with knowledge. So I'll at least start with the first one, and I'll let you kind of sum it up.
Okay.
But to me, we've already kind of talked about a little bit. People who are curious keep innovating. There's an innovation from a position of strength. They never are going to settle for the status quo. They're going to push the limits of what's possible. And I think that's something about a curious mindset around a growth mindset.
Yeah, and this is one that I think there's probably some overlap. One of our other bullets here, qualities, is they're continuous learners, which inspires learning in others. So let's just sort of look at that or expand on that in both those ways. But I had a few different examples here. Some of this stuff is coming from just things that I've read, and when I read those, just what jumps to mind for me. So one of them that I'll take from Jim Collins, who wrote in Great by Choice. One of the things he found in what he describes as 10x companies, as in they're outperforming others by 10x, which is pretty significant. One of the qualities that they had is he described as like they fire bullets, then cannonballs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of companies, again, comparison companies, are sort of the opposite, is they make these big, massive changes, or they make these huge decisions that have a ton of potential upside, but also potentially have a ton of downside. But the 10X companies were just very deliberate in their process of innovation and improvement. And so he's describing it as, firing bullets.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think about bullet versus cannonball, I mean, thousands of bullets, these tiny little things that you can shoot, but the expense, the effort needed to fire a cannonball, right? Like just very, very different. And so the point is innovating, but doing it so they're not settling for the status quo, which would be like, we're not firing anything.
Yeah,
We're just
pretty
comfortable
good.
with where we're at.
We're good.
Right? But these 10X companies were always seeking to improve.
Yeah.
They just did it in such a systematic way where they felt like, and this is actually a quality I've learned about, and I'll reference for one of these other ones, like Pixar. Pixar's belief was, their short films that they do, right? At the beginning of all the Pixar movies, there tends to be that little 5-minute movie. Well, that's a very purposeful thing that they're doing. They're giving, kind of green, young, fledgling directors an opportunity to direct their own movie, but in small form. And the idea behind that is we'd rather have train wrecks with miniature trains than with real ones, right? And so very similar mindset, though, is bullets and cannonballs is hey, let's almost put feelers out. Let's run some small experiments. Let's sort of dip our toes in the water, get some feedback, and then iterate or expand, or just completely pivot. Hey, that is not at all what we're looking for. Let's try this. And then when they did find something, it was a deliberate process of bullet after bullet after bullet, and then cannonball.
Yes.
Once it's developed. So that was one of the things that came to mind for me. Again, just the continuous, we're trying to get better. We're inspired to do better. We want to be innovative, but not just for the sake of it, a smart way of going about it.
Yeah, and I think what that does, it builds confidence in the organization that we're confident but curious. Mm-hmm. We have a game plan. We have a vision. We have a plan to win. Narrow focus, increased depth. We're going to get a little bit better. Instead of how many times have we heard this in companies, we're going to have a transformation. We're going to have a reorganization, means we're going to disrupt everything. Now, we can't grow without disruption, but I like this curiosity is we've got a pretty good system. The innovation, the disruption is going to be narrow enough to get us good feedback and data. Mm-hmm. And so what happens in an organization where the disruption is so great, it overwhelms everyone. And people lose confidence, increases anxiety, decreases self-efficacy. People are not sure how to act.
Especially if early on the returns aren't great.
Yes.
I mean, people are going to lose confidence, and whether they literally do or not, kind of jump ship potentially pretty quickly, right? And just lose faith in what we're doing. So, that to me is just
that's
one of the examples.
Yeah, I think that's a great example is, what'd you say, the continuous learners. I think the inspiration is something to me. One of the things that I realize I'm at my best when I'm learning. And that inspires me, that motivates me. And I think why curiosity matters. If what you're learning, if what you're doing, if the life you're living does not inspire you, it won't inspire anybody else. And I think that's what we're saying. The people that we listed early on in the podcast, the ones we love working with, they're curious. And that's motivating, that's inspiring because they're trying to learn and get better. And as a result, other people want to learn and get better as well.
Yeah. All right, our next quality here, I'll list it, and if you want to expand on it or add to it. So curiosity, what can it do? Well, people who are curiosity, they're humble because they know there's more that's yet to be discovered. What comes to mind there for you, or who comes to mind there for you?
That's a good question in terms of who comes to mind. I was thinking about what first, and then my mind had a pause. I was like, okay, who comes to mind? I think that humility is one of the keys, essential keys to growth. Because with that humility, you realize what you don't know. And I think sometimes the longer you do something, the more likely of the tendency is, here's what I know, here's what I've earned, here's the experiences I've had. But humility, why that matters is the more I know, the less I know. The more I do this work, the less confident I am that I am an expert. Mm-hmm. And so one of the benefits of being on a team, one of the benefits of having you, of having Drew, of having our team, of having other people allow you into their life, that lets you look at opportunities and look at things through a different lens. And you can take that pressure off of yourself, right? The opposite of humility is arrogance. And so to walk in and think, here's what I have to offer, here's what they need from me, here's what they can learn from me, here's what I need to teach them. Just look why curiosity matters if you change the lens. Mm-hmm. You know, and because then you make it more about them than about you. And that, to me, is exciting and inspiring and motivating.
Right. Yeah, a couple different things come to mind. One, I think I mentioned Spencer, and this will be the last time I mention Spencer. He's gotten enough,
I don't think people know who he is, so I appreciate you kind of I appreciate you kind of helping out his brand here.
But just the humility, after last season, one of the things he said to me, which again, like he's leading Major League Baseball in wins and strikeouts, like these really relevant things, like setting records in baseball and this and that, and yet his statement at the end of the year was, I learned more this year than I have at any point in my career.
Wow.
And the humility to recognize that he didn't have it all figured out and he was still learning, and to say that. And my response to him was like, well, Spencer, I hope you say the same thing next year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm sure he's going to learn a lot now that he's going to be faced with a little bit more adversity and so on. But the point was, that's just one of the qualities, again, that I've seen in him. And so the curiosity paired with humility is such a powerful combination because, you can be curious but arrogant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't really know where that leads you. I think it's almost now you're looking through this lens of superiority where I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to find a way to just bring it back to like, well, I still know better than that, or,
So that is so damaging in an organization. I'm glad you used that language. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
Because I think that's what happens. It's a false sense of curiosity. It's a false sense of psychological safety. It's a false sense of, I really want to know what you think. But as soon as I hear what you think, I smash it and I squash it because what I think is better.
Right.
And so that is worse than even just like, I'd rather somebody coming and saying, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it, than, hey, tell me what you think, what are your thoughts, and dismiss it from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. That's not a healthy discourse. That's not conversation. That's not curiosity. That's disingenuous.
Sure. All right, let's go hit our next one here. I'll intro it, and then if you want to expand. So next one is they ask great questions, which tends to rub off on other people. So you start to get more people asking questions. The more questions you ask, in my opinion, you tend to get better answers.
Yeah, and I think to me, this goes with the one later on, they assume nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, Cory, we put pressure on people that you got to ask great questions. Well, if you're naturally curious, you're just going to ask questions that are relevant and interested without a means to an end other than expanding my knowledge. And I think about your children. They get to the point where they ask off-the-wall questions. And that natural curiosity, that wonderment of the world, I think, like, I want to know, help me understand. I think I was laughing earlier with you and when Jay was young, I think 2 or 3, he's like, Dad, if God invented the world, who invented God? Like, very curious. How'd this world come about at the age of 3? I didn't have a great answer for him. So I'm like, hey, son, we'll talk about that in the morning. But when I think about asking questions from a curious mindset, I think about the wonderment of a child, exploring their world, understanding their world without bias, without assumption, without any other sense of trying to prove themselves. They're just trying to understand. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what naturally curious people do. That's what being curious does. That's why it matters in an organization that I'm interested in you. Hey, how'd you get here? How'd you make that decision? Help me understand. What is your story? They aren't great questions. They're just very interested in relevant questions.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind here. So one, the idea of assuming nothing, starting there. This is really, really cool. The last time I was out at Oregon with the football program, I happened to be spending some time with the director of ops, and he pulls up a video on his computer, his phone. He says, oh, man, have you seen this yet? And I'm like, no, what is it? So it was a video of LeBron James. He was on a podcast, and he was talking about his early years in Miami with the Heat organization. And what he said was, after his first year where they got the big three together, him, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, and the infamous decision, and then, his introduction of like, we're not going to win 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6 championships, and so on. Well, they go on to lose in year 1. But Eric Spoelstra, the head coach of the team, that offseason, he went out and spent the week with Chip Kelly and Oregon football. So this is a time when Chip Kelly, who was and still probably is one of the most innovative, like brilliant offensive minds in college football, was running like his spread offense. And so Spoelstra went out there to just try to understand the principles of the spread offense, because he wanted to try to bring them and integrate them into what they were doing with the Miami Heat in basketball.
Yeah, crazy.
So he didn't assume that just because we've got this big three, these really talented guys, a couple of surefire Hall of Famers or whatever, that we're just going to roll the ball out and win.
Yeah, so good.
Right? And we need to continue to try to get better. We're not going to be complacent or lazy just because we've got some talent. Let's continue to try to improve and see how we can tap into even more of this talent that we have.
Yeah, and so imagine, like, I wonder what this would look like. Like, that's one trait of somebody who's curious. I wonder, what if? Mm-hmm. What if we did something different? You talk about challenging the status quo. Oh, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I mean, sort of the flip side of this that came to mind for me, Drew and I did a recent podcast, and we called it Looking Deeper, and it was all about just asking questions.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to pull from Jim Collins one more time here. In Great by Choice, one of the things that made 10X companies different was what he described as productive paranoia.
Yes.
And so they were constantly asking questions, and not from a position of weakness per se, but they were just mindful enough to understand just because we're good doesn't mean we're always going to be good. And so combining, like you're saying, like, well, but what if we're wrong about this? Why might this fail? So pre-mortems, post-mortems, anticipating that we might not have it all figured out. And so let's be thorough in how we go about things. Let's be deliberate. Let's be intentional. When we do go through certain things, like, let's try to look back and learn from it, understand it, and make it better. That's sort of the contrast to some of this other stuff that we're talking about, right? Like Spoelstra pursuing knowledge, not assuming that he has it all figured out. In this sense, productive paranoia is, we're protecting ourselves against making catastrophic events, but we're deliberately just asking a lot of really intentional and maybe tough questions.
Yeah, that make you uncomfortable, and people tend to shy away from that, just being human beings. So I love that productive paranoia. It drives my conversations. It drives my curiosity. It allows me to look at it from every angle and separate who I am from the process. That's where humility plays a part. I was thinking, we just finished up the Masters, and Bryson DeChambeau, the mad scientist, he assumes nothing of the status quo, that he completed and created a whole new iron. I don't even understand the technology behind it, but he kind of mirrored the way the driver is made with his irons, because the driver is the most forgiving club. And Brandon Chambly, I was watching it on live, and he's like, I don't know why anybody else has never thought of this. And so that removing assumptions allows you to say, well, what if? What if we try this? And now they cost about $10,000 a set to make. And I would probably say you don't want to do your wedges after watching some of his chipping, but he's constantly searching for answers. And just because it's never been done doesn't mean it can't be done. Mm-hmm. One of the conversations we had with the recent leadership team is we're trying to drive them towards doing things a little bit differently, driving them towards seeing things in a different way, of making it more about the customer than about themselves. And one of the leaders said, here's what tends to happen. We assume we know what they need from the very beginning. They call up and say, hey, here's a problem we're having. Here's where we're struggling. And based on your company's expertise, we can fall into that trap if we aren't careful. Mm-hmm. Well, how many athletes have we seen call up? How many teams? Oh, we know exactly the method. We know exactly the play-by-play. I've seen this 1,000 times. Let me tell you what you need. Mm-hmm. And so we assume we know what the problem is. We assume we have the answer. So we cut short the conversation. We cut short the curiosity, and by asking questions about, well, what does that really mean in your life? How did this problem develop? What would it look like if we were able to help you? And that sets limits on growth. It sets limits on connection. It sets limits on the impact you can make in their life because you've seen it all before.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to our next one. I'm going to combine two here again. So one, they want help from others, which makes the team more collaborative. And they aren't afraid to speak up, which opens up other team members as well. So I think those two are very similar. Where's your mind go?
They want help from others. That to me, for some reason, Cory, the word it just seems like authentic. Like it's not a false sense of, as we were saying earlier. Hey, can you step in and help here? Mm-hmm. It's hey, what do you think about this? How do you see this? How would you build this out? I loved, you heard Drew and I in a conversation earlier today, and we were kind of putting together something you'd put a lot of work in. We were adding our ideas, and it's like, hey, are you guys talking about this? What do you need from me? What can I share with you on that? To me, we were curious about what you created. You were curious about, okay, what can you add to the conversation? Mm-hmm. And I think that was that to me was inspiring about being a continuous learner. That was like, okay, let's build upon this knowledge base. And so I guess I added one more in there.
No, you're good.
People's willingness to work, people's willingness to speak up. Mm-hmm. Because I think curiosity drives excitement. Like one of my favorite things to do is sit around here and we throw out an idea, just brainstorming, and all of a sudden you say something and Drew says something or Meredith or somebody on our team, and then the conversation just continues. Mm-hmm. And so you create a space where it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be ignorant. It's okay to not know.
Yeah.
That creates conversation.
Yeah, I mean the first word that I wrote down was vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Like it requires vulnerability to want help. It requires vulnerability to speak up. And so people who are curious, what they're doing is they're being vulnerable in a lot of ways. Vulnerability tends to build trust because it drops like the defenses of the people around them. So if I'm vulnerable, the people around me are more likely to be vulnerable. Now collaboration can happen. Instead of walls being built up around, I'm trying to protect my ideas or do things the way that I want to, people are more likely to contribute to the conversation. And the best example of this, which I ultimately found myself landing on, and I think we've probably talked about this on the podcast at some point, I mentioned Pixar. So Pixar is sort of infamous for what they call their brain trust meetings.
So good.
So over the course of making one of their films, which again, we're talking animated films, but they get together a small group of the writers, directors, animators, and then you get some key executives. We're talking a room full of probably 10 or 12 people, and they just watch the film. And it might be in the really, really early stages of it, but the whole idea behind it is we just want to get a lot of different perspectives, share ideas, ask questions, and put anything and everything on the table to try to make this the best possible film. And what Ed Catmull, who wrote Creativity Inc., great book, and watch plenty of videos of Catmull talking about this. What he says is like it's really hard to just lose the collective ego in the room.
So good.
And for people to remove the power dynamic of the situation, which is hard. But man, when we accomplish it, like when we kind of catch lightning in a bottle, we usually produce something pretty darn good.
Yep.
And that to me is the perfect example of what we're talking about here is like everybody in that room is just curious enough around, okay, there's some really good stuff here, but how can we make it even better? How can we make the best possible film out of what's already here? And so anything and everything's on the table. And as long as anything and everything's on the table, well, somewhere within that is probably the best idea. And so again, they tend to produce pretty good movies because of it.
Yeah, and so to me, it's curiosity as opposed to criticism.
Right.
It's curiosity in light of comparison. Like, we live in a world of comparison. We live in a world of criticism. Let me tell you why your idea is wrong. Let me tell you why you shouldn't think that. Let me tell you about that. And so that criticism and also comparison, I'm trying to make it about me. But if I can be naturally curious and remove the ego, that it doesn't matter. What's the general said? It's amazing what you can accomplish when nobody cares who gets the credit. That's what we're able in trying to create. And so what's the neurotransmitter that's happening when I'm vulnerable, when I'm humble, when I'm inviting others in? It's oxytocin. It's the bonding hormone. And so if you're trying to create a culture of connection, one of these will be naturally curious, inviting others into the conversation about what they think and how they can help get it better in that process.
Yeah, so we got one more here, and you alluded to it a little bit, but I want to make sure we hit it as our final one. But people appreciate their willingness to work, which raises the collective effort. So I've got some thoughts on this. Where's your mind going, though?
Yeah, so I think curiosity, as you said, it's more than just asking a question, it's action associated with it. And so if you're passionate about learning, if you're passionate about knowledge, if you're passionate about getting better, there's going to be action associated with your curiosity. And so to me, that it becomes less about a transactional nature of work. It becomes more about a completed purpose. And so I think, to me, who motivates you, Cory? Who inspires you? What kind of culture do you want to be a part of? I think the people that I am inspired by are those that are curious, because their curious drives their determination and their relentless pursuit of knowledge and getting better and being better and always trying to improve and always trying to be innovative. And the humility, that, to me, this one puts it all together. That's motivating. I want to be a part of that because I love learning and I want to help you get better.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, here, just teammates who have been around, and, in particular, some that have been on the, kind of the front lines with me doing some things in a role that I serve here. This has been sort of the climate, the culture that I've tried to help create, and also it's like a chicken or the egg thing. I don't necessarily know if I'm the one who sets the tone for it, but I try to just be a part of it. A lot of the content that ends up finding its way in front of, our clients, for example, are, myself and teammates, like, well, I just happen to be on social media at night, and I'm scrolling through my phone like the rest of the world, and I see something, and I send it. And, with usually just the message of like, there might be something in here that we can use, or an article, gets floated out into a group message or something along those lines. And again, oftentimes, like, that's after hours, it's in downtime or whatever. And that's motivating then to feel like, hey, we're kind of in this together. You know what I mean? And when you set that tone of like, hey, I'm out here and look at the work that I'm trying to produce, and I'm always like, I'm never really ever turning it off. So even when I'm just on my phone and, killing a little bit of time before bed, it's like I've still got one eye on work and how do we make this better? How do we improve or whatever? And you feel that from people. And even to the tune of, previous team members that we've had, like, still share ideas and content and stuff, which is cool, So it's just when you recognize the effort in somebody else, it makes you want to give a little bit more and to do the same and so on. So
yeah, and just builds on it. I think, I don't know how many videos I took of the Masters interviews yesterday after it over from the caddy, from everybody else. I mean, the caddy said, I learned a long time ago in my life, you want to get better at something, surround yourself with people who are better than you. And so that's what I've been able to do. And he said, whether it's been players or whether it's been other caddies, that curiosity around what other people are doing and how can I share that and how can I build upon that, I think it invites, as you said, and motivates and inspires in that process.
All right, final thoughts here. We went through all these different traits and the impact that curiosity can have when you get some people on your team, let's say, who embody what curiosity looks like. Any final thoughts around it?
Yeah, to me, and you just summed it up really well, that's the kind of culture you want to be a part of and you want to help build. and you want to foster in others. And so, again, as Drew often likes to say, it's not going to happen through you unless it first happens within you. And so to me, I would challenge our listeners, what are you really curious about? Have you taken time to really examine your life, examine your purpose, examine the work that you're doing, examine your culture, and what might happen if you ask the question, well, I wonder if we just do this? And how are you integrating all of this data and inviting other people into the conversation to help you be better and pursue better along the way?
Yeah. Yeah, my final thoughts, I think we did a pretty good job of hitting this from a lot of different angles, but maybe the antithesis of this and something that you can look for, especially we were talking about finding this in others, is if you get the response on something, like if you just say, hey, why do you do it that way?
Oh, yeah.
And if you hear like, well, that's the way I've always done it, it's an indicator that somebody's probably not curious about finding a better way. So whatever that can look like within your industry, I think that's just one very simple example of maybe how you can try to find this in some people around you.
Yeah, you just triggered something else that may be another question. If you ask that question, why do you do it this way? And the answer is, we've always done it that way. They haven't thought through it. Maybe there's hubris or arrogance involved. If they tell you, I don't know, they haven't explored it. Mm-hmm. And they're just doing it because somebody else told them that. They haven't taken ownership of it.
Right.
Or they don't have the confidence to go do something different.
Right.
And so there's a lot like that what you just stumbled upon there at the end sparked my curiosity. I was like, okay, that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for joining and listening. You know, why we do what we do is to help you. We hope you found this to be relevant. If so, if you would do us a favor and just rate this or write us a review. And if you're curious, we're always curious about what you're thinking, about how this is impacting you. We'd love feedback on how you're maybe putting this into practice or any questions you may have. We'd love to hear from those and be able to answer those on the podcast as we go forward. So until next time, be better and pursue better.